Way back in the 80s, as a child, I used to watch a show called The Adventures of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. The show is currently one of the longest running cartoon shows in history and is famous for teaching young children life lessons. I loved the show and watched it every day. However, by the age of 13, I stopped watching the show. I am now a grown up and live in an apartment in New York. One day when I was browsing the internet, I found a site that was selling episodes of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. I scrolled through and saw they had the whole collection. Naturally, like most people my age, I bought the collection to relive my childhood. I received an entire DVD collection in the mail of all the seasons. Oddly enough, there was one that I received was on a VHS tape. I did some research on the internet, and what I got was a few posts discussing the episode of Fat Albert that only aired for a few minutes. According to the fans, the episode was just the beginning of the startup, but then right there as the theme song began to play, the show cut to static and an announcement was made on CBS, the channel that originally aired Fat Albert, that tonight's episode was Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, was canceled and another episode will play ahead. Upon realization of this, I became excited, not only because now I have the complete collection of my favorite show that I loved as a kid, but I also have some rare unreleased episode. I decided to play the episode titled Smiling first. I got out my old VHS player and plugged it into the TV and put the VHS in. I was greeted with a black screen which just said in bold red letters, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, smiling. From there, then it just cut to a picture of a mouth smiling with the odd Japanese text above it. There was a rip on the screen that covered at least 3 of the symbols. Thankfully, I texted my friend, who spoke Japanese, and he was able to tell me. Using the parts of the symbol that weren't cut off, that what they were he would translate for me, was for some odd reason. Now, before I mention the theme, I will need to make a mention of the intro was cut out and only the scenes I have mentioned in it. The main theme began to play, except something was wrong. The song was lower and slowed down, making it sound depressing and obnoxious. Even weirder are the scenes where Bill Cosby was supposed to be on stage, dancing around during the theme song. He wasn't there. It was just an empty background. It then cut to where Fat Albert's friends were supposed to be carrying him, but instead was just a picture of Fat Albert, lying on the ground and footprints leading off the screen in the direction they were carrying Fat Albert. But what really stood out was that the scratch marks leading in the opposite direction of the footprints. From what I could gather, I believe the boys saw something and ran away. However, one of the boys wasn't able to get away fast enough, and it grabbed him and dragged him away. The intro then cut to the junkyard, and it was abandoned and emptied. It showed the instruments of the Cosby Kids used for music. The instruments were just lying on the ground, mangled and broken. I could have sworn at the end of one of the instruments, I saw a bit of blood, if someone had used it as a weapon to hit someone. The intro finally ended, and I was quite shocked at some of the imagery I saw, but I had continued to watch the episode. The episode shows the Cosby Kids and Albert playing in the junkyard. Rudy began talking about how he heard about a new girl moving into a home nearby them. Rudy then went on to saying, I've heard from kids who have spoken to her to tell me that she's really weird. We shouldn't hang out with her. Albert then said, Just because she's different doesn't mean we shouldn't hang out with her. Before Albert and Rudy could finish their conversation, the school bell rang. Albert and the gang hurried inside the school. When they arrived, they ran into the new girl. The gang introduced themselves and said hello. The new girl replied in a sad, depressed tone, Hi, I'm Daisy. Albert then asked her if she wanted to walk into class with them. Daisy then said, Okay, I guess so. As they walked in, Albert asked her what had her so down, and Daisy just replied, I just feel sad. I've never had so many friends. I've always been secluded and everything just has been meaningless to feel it. Albert then replied saying, But it's not, Daisy. Everything you do has a meaning, and life what you make of it. When you finally realize it, You will smile and be glad I told you." Daisy then said, "Okay then." After school, Daisy and Albert were walking when they eventually encountered Rudy lighting a joint with his special lighter that he carries around. Albert then becomes furious and warns Rudy that drugs can do mean things to him and make him go insane. However, Rudy brushes off what Albert said and continued. The next day, Rudy got into trouble after having an outburst and attacked a fellow classmate and beating him to near unconscious. The events like this continued over the course of the next 3 days until Albert couldn't take it anymore. He decided he would tell the school faculty that he was doing drugs and to see if he could get Rudy any help. However, the school was already over and Albert decided that he would wait until tomorrow to tell the school faculty. However, as Albert was walking to school, a scream bellowed from Rudy's house. Albert rushed over and tried to open it, but it was locked. Albert quickly went home to call the police. After a few minutes, Officer Gomez and the other policemen arrived at the house. They went inside only to find Rudy's parents, sitting at the dinner table, dead, with their heads lying against the table, and Rudy was nowhere to be found. The police did an investigation of the bodies, concluded that they were poisoned. Eventually, Daisy arrived and was in terror of what she saw in the sight. The police began to look around the house, and Albert and Daisy decided to help and find the ventilation shaft ripped open and assumed whoever kidnapped Rudy escaped through the ventilation shaft with them. Around 10 p.m., 2 days after Rudy's disappearance, Albert sees out the outside window in the dark, Rudy standing in the dark corner staring at him. Albert ran out to see him, but Rudy ran off. The following day, Daisy was nowhere to be found, and after 3 days of absence, the police put out a search. Some neighbors state that they were witnessed what looked to be like a kidnapping the night of Daisy's disappearance. The witness claimed that they had saw what looked like Rudy, with a sadistic smile on his face, carrying something in a large sack away from Daisy's home. Albert then thought to himself, "It's those drugs. They're making Rudy's mind messing and make him do these terrible things. He wasn't kidnapped. He killed his parents, climbed out of the ventilation shaft." But then the show cut to the live-action Bill Cosby murmuring to himself, "It will not get my smile. It will not get my smile. It will not get my smile." Bill eventually became more aggressive and began yelling and pacing around the room like a madman. It then cuts to the cartoon and shows Officer Gomez driving in his car. His tires eventually burst from rolling across glass shards from what looked like smashed bottles. Officer Gomez's car crashed into the wall. The front end, if he crawled out, reveals that he had twisted his leg and was immobile. Rudy then appears out from the nearby alley and starts beating Officer Gomez until he was unconscious, and then drags his body off into the alley. Live-action Bill Cosby appeared on the screen and was beating himself to near death with a baseball bat, repeating, "It will not have my smile," over and over and over again. His face was swollen and it was losing insane amounts of blood. One of the stagehands eventually came out to help him, but struck him down with a baseball bat, and then Bill Cosby continued to beat himself with the bat until he was dead. It then cut back to the cartoon and showed Albert sitting and reading the newspaper. He sees the newspaper that Officer Gomez disappeared last night, and his patrol car was found 2 blocks down from where Albert lived. Albert decided to go out and investigate. He went to the spot where Officer Gomez's car was found. He walked around the area for an entire hour searching for clues. Albert eventually found what he was looking for. It just barely caught his eye when he saw in the nearby alley, glistening a very thin stench of light that just barely reached the alley. What looked like a few drops of blood. He went over to the alley and found several drops of blood leading further into the alley. What Albert found at the end of the alley was shocking. It was a severed hand. The hand that had a small puncture wounds on it, as if a syringe had been stuck into it and blood had been drained from it, almost as if a vampire bit it several times. Albert then tried to open the door that was right behind the severed hand, but it was blocked off by some object. Albert then called to the police, and the police arrived and took the hand as evidence, and they did an investigation of the alley. They found nothing else but the drops of blood and the hand. The hand was eventually confirmed to be Officer Gomez's hand. Albert was still in shock from that day, so he suspected that Rudy was behind it all. Albert got the remaining gang together and decided that they should look for Rudy to confront him. They searched and searched but found nothing. However, after a few hours of searching, Russell got bored and wandered off. The rest of the gang noticed this and they went out looking for him. They eventually found Russell standing in the alley staring at Rudy. Rudy then grabbed Russell and ran him off with them and had a huge grin on his face. They followed Rudy without him noticing, and Rudy led them to a warehouse. Albert decided that the gang should stay out here and wait, while the rest of the gang thought he was crazy, but Albert wanted to see if he could talk some sense into Rudy. Albert entered the warehouse and saw Rudy standing across from Rudy, facing in the opposite direction. Standing in the middle of the length was between Albert and Rudy was Russell. He was just standing there. Albert then yelled, "Russell, get over here before Rudy hurts you!" Rudy then turned around, pointed the desk lamp towards Russell. The light revealed that it was just a simply dummy. Albert had been fooled. Albert then yelled, "Rudy, don't you see what you're doing? You're hurting people. You need to turn yourself in." Rudy did not respond, but instead turned around. His eyes were dark in holes and just had a big smile on his face. Rudy then just stood aside, revealed the body right behind him. The body was hanging upside down from the ceiling. Its face was skinned, only showing under a layer of muscle and tissue. The body was wearing Rudy's clothes. This confused Albert, because the Rudy that had done all these things was just wearing the same clothes. However, he didn't have to wait long before the answer was revealed. Dark-eyed Rudy grabbed his face and pulled it off, like the mask, revealing it to be Daisy behind of it all. Albert stood dumbfounded in terror of what he saw. Suddenly it all made sense. It wasn't Rudy that was doing this, it was Daisy, running around with similar clothes and wearing his face like a mask. Albert then said, "Why are you doing this, Daisy?" Daisy then replied, "Because, Albert, I could never smile, but how now I can through all the faces of other people." Albert then said, "But what about Officer Gomez's hand in the alley? It looked like several puncture wounds." Daisy then said, "Why don't I show you?" She shined the desktop lamp on another hanging body. That one was the Officer Gomez uniform and also had been skinned. No doubt it was Officer Gomez's body, not only because it had a police outfit, but it's because it was missing a hand. She then pulled down the police shirt, revealing his stomach, and revealed his entire body covered in puncture wounds from what looked like needles. Daisy then said, "I eventually began to feel sad again, even though I was wearing a smile. So I decided I would drain the blood and stomach acid from the people I collected. What I do with the blood and stomach acid is I take it to a friend who I know. He makes it into a smokable drug. The drug makes me feel so happy, but I'm not able to smile from it. So if I wear the smile and use the drugs to make me feel happy, I will have a smile. If I keep them both on then." Albert then replied sharply, "But why did you cut Officer Gomez's hand in the first place?" Daisy then replied with a maniacal manner, "He tried to grab me by my throat with his hand, so I cut it off. I didn't want to waste the blood in his hand, so I took a syringe I had in a jar and I drained his blood from his hand to the jar." Daisy then laughed and said, "However, that's not important. What the fact is that you're the happiest person I know, and thus I need your smile." Daisy then pulled out a large knife covered in blood. The blood glistened in the light from the moon, showing the crack of the ceiling. This sight had made Albert sick. Albert ran for the door, but Daisy got to it before him, locked it and swallowed the key. Albert then said, "No, you will not have my smile, and you will never take anyone else's smile ever again." Albert then ran some gasoline cans, which he spotted and picked one of them up and poured it on Daisy. It got into her eyes as she screamed and began rubbing her eyes. Daisy eventually rubbed it off her eyes and able to see again. She then charged with the knife, ready to skin him. Albert then remembered the lighter that Rudy had always carried around, which he last used it for smoking drugs that his friend gave it to him. Albert then ran for Rudy's body and searched his pockets and was relieved to see his lighter in his pocket. Albert then quickly turned around and lifted the lighter. Daisy stopped, and what looked like Albert, before she could run away, he said, "Hey, hey, hey, it's time to play." Albert then tossed the lighter at Daisy and she was ignited. She ran around her room screaming as she was burning. She eventually fell to the other gasoline cans, causing a large explosion of the fire. The fire grew and began to engulf the building. Eventually, it covered most of the entire warehouse, and the boys saw the light from the fire inside and the smoke coming from the door. They tried to get it open by kicking and ramming it, but it didn't work. Eventually, the place burned down with Albert in it. The police and fire department arrived and found Albert, half dead and buried in large amounts of rubble. They managed to pull him out and put him on a stretcher and rolled him off into the ambulance. Albert then looked up and saw the charred body, holding the knife that Daisy tried to use to kill him. He assumed that was Daisy. He also saw that Russell was back with the rest of the gang. Albert then put his head back and rested, knowing that they found Russell, but ended Daisy. And they then loaded Albert into the ambulance, and then it drove off. The new episode then just ended. Cut to static and shot of Daisy, wearing Rudy's face. This went on for a full whole minute. I felt as if Daisy was staring at me through the screen. The episode then cut to black. I didn't know what to think. I was feeling so many things at the moment. Fear from what I saw, anger at the person who sent it to me, thinking it would be a funny joke, and relief that Albert made it out alive. Despite all the feelings, I knew one thing's for sure. I had to destroy the VHS. I took it and smashed it into bits with a hammer, with the entire complete DVD collection. I then burned them just for safe measure. What is this? Is this the only copy? I'm not sure, but take it as a warning to whoever reading this. If you receive a VHS copy of Fat Albert and titled Fat Albert Smiling, you then immediately destroy it. Well, my pretties, that was Fat Albert, the Cosby Kids, Smiling. A Fat Albert Lost episode creepypasta written by Tnade711. My final thoughts on this story? Well, this is actually pretty good pasta, actually. This is actually one of the fewer Lost episode creepypastas that managed to do something good. Like, with this story, this is honestly one of the fewer Lost episode pastas that managed to do something good. I mean, it's not... Well, I mean, there's a couple cliches in this story, such as getting an online VHS cliche, but the thing about that is that this is actually quite believable, because, I mean, with Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, I have seen some episodes that are rather disturbing, so... yeah, I've seen some other episodes that tackled, subject matters that can be disturbing. But with this episode, it's well made and detailed. There's no hyperrealistic blood or gore, not those kind of cliched stories. But I do remember reading this story a long time ago, and this wasn't too bad. It was actually quite of an interesting pasta. I mean, in my honest opinion, I have not watched Fat Albert in like a long time, but this episode definitely is quite interesting. I mean, it does have, it does have a great plot line to it, which I think it's really nice, especially how everything built up and stuff. However, the only thing I can really say was that there was a few things that I honestly really didn't like this story too much, and I will be getting to that in a bit. But before I do, I am going to sit here and say this right now, that there is this one story that, there's this thing I do need to make a mention of. Now, to be fair and honest, this is actually one of the things that I've never expected to come across, but this is definitely one of the things. The grammar was pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. The storyline of it was pretty good. It builds up to, who Daisy was. Daisy, started off by, being one of those quiet people. But then later on, we get to see that she becomes the bad guy and she pretty much, she killed a few people, probably injured some as well. And at the end, she tries to, kill Albert, but eventually Albert wins. Honestly, this was actually quite of an interesting story because most Lost episode pastas don't end, don't act up, in a way. Like, however, I can definitely say this. I'm definitely saying right now that most Lost episodes are not as really good nowadays, but this one, it's actually quite awesome. I mean, there were a couple flaws with it, I'm not gonna lie. Like, the ending of it was, I could definitely say, I mean, that's kind of like your typical Lost episode pasta where it ends with, the person destroying the tape and the whole collection of Fat Albert afterwards. I mean, while I could say that has been done to death too many times and a lot of pastas, and it does happen, more often because here's the thing. It's kind of hard to end a good Lost episode pasta without repeating the same ending formula. Like, it's kind of hard to make a good ending to a Lost episode pasta. And that's just me being brutally fair. But the story was flat out amazing. I wasn't too big on the ending, but the rest of the story ended up perfectly well. There was a couple things that didn't really sit well with me, like the ending didn't really sit well with me. But if I had to say another thing that really didn't really sit well too much with me, that would have to be, I think it would have to be, the fact that, Rudy was doing drugs, but then Rudy's parents disappear and all. Well, maybe not disappear, but like Rudy disappear. I mean, it kind of makes me wonder if Daisy kidnapped Rudy and dressed up as Rudy just to, get away with it, which I have the feeling that that's becoming the case. But at the same time, some of the stuff is kind of confusing in this story, but the story honestly managed to do pretty well. I definitely gotta say it's a really nice story. Although despite the few, what was it? Oh yeah. Despite the fact that there was some flaws with the story, I didn't think it was that bad. It honestly was pretty well made. So, I guess with that being the case and with that being said, I'm going to sit here and say right now that I will leave the link in the description down below. So, if you guys want to go check out this story, you're more than welcome to. So, I will be sitting here and saying this right now that this is just simply my own personal opinion. And if you disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these, creepypastas. This is just simply my own personal thoughts. I'm gonna give this story I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. While it was a really great story, it's definitely well made. I personally really enjoyed it. I thought it was well made. However, if there is one thing I have to say was that I wasn't really a big fan of the ending. That is definitely something I could say is that I wasn't really a big fan of the ending. But, the story could have been better, but it was still alright for what it is. So, I guess with that being the case and that being said, what did you guys personally think of this story? Did you all enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better. Feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm the Lion Queen. I want to thank you so much for watching today's video. If you're new to my channel, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, if you guys want to go follow my DeviantArt account, link to that will be in the About page section. So if you want to go follow me on there, you can. If you guys want to go follow me on Twitter, link to my Twitter account will also be in the About page section. So you guys can go follow me on there if you want. Also, if you're interested in subscribing to my backup channel known as Miss Dark Shigo, link to that will also be in the About page section. So you guys can go check that out and be sure to subscribe to that one if you haven't. So, I guess with that being said and that being the case, if I am missing something that I did not say about this episode, please let me know what it is and we'll go from there. So, anyways, I guess with that being said, I will be seeing you guys all in the next video. Peace out, and like always, please roll the outro because I'm out.